Hi there. Today I want to talk a little bit about small and medium sized businesses in the African context, as well as touch on a little bit about lower middle market businesses in the African reality. Okay, and I want to focus specifically the content of this video to US and European investors because oftentimes there is a gap of information, as we say, information asymmetry between the African markets and those who are outside of the market. And my goal with this video is to provide folks in the private equity VC space a little bit of understanding about the African market in these regards. So to kick things off, right, I'd like to share with you a little bit maybe about the historical and the context of the market as of now, right? A lot of African countries have come, as you well know, from the 1960s independence movements, and they have, in a way, and if you know a little bit about African history, you'll understand that a lot of African countries at the time of their independence, in essence, there weren't many trained people to take these countries and move their economies forward, right? So, in essence, a lot of these economies were led by people who did not necessarily have the training, appropriate technical expertise, and capacity to actually lead their countries. But that's not to say that independence shouldn't have happened. But the point is, by putting it in that historical context, we start understanding, okay, where things are coming from and where things have moved to. And of course, we've all heard stories of political instability, civil wars in some spots across the continent, and how a lot of these countries have emerged from these realities to become what they are today, mostly stable in many corners of the continent. Some economies thriving, others stagnant. But in the same way, we can also trace, today's small medium sized companies or lower middle market company. They really came from the generation of my parents who came out of these movements for independence. For example, my country, Angola, came out of independence in 1975, right? So we're relatively a young nation, a young state, and we've made a lot of progress, whether it's from the economic standpoint or human development, or in terms of growing and expanding our market, right? So the point is, right now there is a lot of small medium sized businesses that were started 2, 3, 4 decades ago, or even longer, by people who now are starting to think about retirement, right? There are hundreds of thousands of businesses, if not millions, across the continent. But the challenge is there isn't necessarily a good database for people to find that information, number one. And number two, there aren't many intermediaries in the continent that can provide the level of service that we often find in the market here in the US, where you have investment bankers or you have business brokers who can provide relatively easily deals to private equities or VC and so forth. So that's the challenge that in the African context, a lot of folks, a lot of us are dealing with, right? So an obvious question is, okay, how do you overcome that challenge? based on a number of people that I've been talking to and my own experience, oftentimes it's really the to source deal. The approach is really proprietary. It's networking, is connecting with people, it's asking for people about deal opportunities. And here's one thing that I think it's important for investors to understand. It's that in the African market, right, or for most of the African market, let's exclude places like South Africa, where the capital markets is relatively stronger compared to the rest of the continent. Let's exclude Egypt, Morocco, maybe Nigeria as well, that is relatively progressing significantly. And the and and when we look into the rest of the countries, right, deal sourcing is really a proprietary led effort, right? So a lot of networking, a lot of calls, a lot of visiting small businesses, um, a lot of asking accountants, attorneys, and again, it's gonna boil down to networking, attending events and conferences in the continent to know who know what and where, right? So that's kind of the first thing that investors have to be mindful, whether you're backing an independent sponsor, or excuse me, a searcher, or you are a private equity group, or you are an independent sponsor just seeking to buy a business in the continent because you love the continent. You have to understand that deal sourcing is not a simple and straightforward process as it is, for example, here in the US, or maybe in Europe, not very familiar with the European market. So that's number one. The second thing, the second process of the deal flow that is a little bit complex is in terms of due diligence, right? Before I jump to due diligence, right? I kind of skipped a step there. The step in the middle is really, once you even identify a deal, a lot of small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, um, don't have M&A experience. They have never thought about selling a business, or much less how to begin that process, right? So it's gonna be an education journey and process to bring the business seller or the potential business seller to the same level of thinking, right? Even here in the US, where we have an incredibly capital market, including a private market, right? They are still business owners who do not understand M&A, who do not have experience in any way or form about any process of the transaction, right? So in the African context, equally, it's important to be patient. It's important to educate the prospective business owner. Let me give you an example. A potential deal flow sourcing could look like you network with prospective business seller, and you just start conversation whether or not they would be interested in selling, and they would probably ask you about, okay, how do I even sell a business, right? So you start educating the business owner, right? If you are not confident about me keeping your information confidential, we can sign an NDA. And again, in the African context, right, trust is more important than NDA. If someone doesn't trust you, they will not even consider an NDA or any conversation or whatsoever. So it's important to cultivate and nurture that trust. That can take weeks, it can take months, excuse me, and it could even take years, right? So when you are in that process, in that stage, right, it's really important to be considerate of the fact that a lot of these business owners are not very familiar with M&A. So I don't want to go any longer. I'm gonna stop here and then do another recording to touch on the due diligence stage and what are the current challenges and what you can do to overcome those. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.